Hello everyone, it's Shannon here from Craft Ghetto. In today's video, we are going to create a fall tree using a really fun watercoloring technique that involves a spray bottle. To start, I have 2 pieces of watercolor paper. I'm using B paper, which comes in 6x9 sheets. This is a 140-pound weight, and I just cut the sheet in half, so each panel is 6x4.5. I'm going to stamp the large image from the Adventures stamp set in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is a waterproof ink, onto both of my panels. So this is the first panel, and now I'm going to grab the second panel here, ink it up again in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and stamp it a second time. This second panel will be the boys that I cut out and put on my card later once I finish the background. I'm now going to grab one of these panels and stamp my sentiment. My sentiment is also from the Adventures stamp set. All the sentiments on this set are wonderful. The one I'm using for today's card says, "To another year of adventures," which I think is perfect for a birthday card, and this card would be wonderful for a masculine birthday card. I'm now going to grab my second panel, the one without the sentiment, and I'm going to sketch out the remainder of this boy's hand and foot. Again, these boys are the ones that I will color and then cut out and add to my card later once my background panel is done. Once I sketch it out with a pencil, then I will grab a permanent marker. I'm using a fine point Sharpie here, and I will just go over my pencil lines and then erase them with an eraser. Once I finish this panel, I'll grab my first panel, the one with the sentiment, and extend the tree. I don't have to worry about the boys on this panel because the boys I just finished will cover these guys up. Extending this image out is pretty easy due to the illustrator's gestural style, and I'm only doing this so that the image covers my entire panel. You could avoid sketching this out if you simply use a smaller panel or maybe frame your panel. Now with my drawing complete, I'm now ready to move on to watercoloring my background. I have my first panel here mounted on some cardboard with painter's tape. This is to reduce the warping. For this technique, you will need a spray bottle. A cheap spray bottle works best. You'll also need some water to mix up your watercolors. The watercolors I'm using today is this watercolor wheel and palette, which is available at Waffle, but you can use whatever watercolors you prefer. The first thing I need to do is get my watercolors ready to use. I'm going to get some water on my brush and then apply that water to the paint, and then just mix the paint and the water together to get that paint liquidy and runny. And once it's running, I'm picking it up with my brush and placing it into my palette, kind of scraping the brush on the edge of the palette to get that paint in the palette. I do this for all the colors except for the white. I'm going to use all these colors today. I'm mixing up the most though of the yellow because that's the lightest color and that's the one that can get lost the quickest. And now that my paint's all mixed up, I can now spray my panel. So I just have some water here. I'm focusing my spray at the end of my branches. I'm trying not to get any water on the trunk. It's okay if some water gets on the boys because I will be covering them up. And I'm trying to hold the panel up here so you can see there's a lot of water on the surface. It's pooling and puddling, but unfortunately the light is not really hitting it so you guys can't see. And I don't want to tilt it up too much to have any of this water run off. Now that my panel is all good and wet, I can now start adding my paint. So I'm just picking up the paint with my brush and then transferring it to the puddles of water just by tapping the tip of the brush into the puddles. I'm using the most of the yellow because that's my lightest color, so I'm going to put a lot of yellow down onto my panel, and then I'll use less of my darker colors. This spray bottle technique is really a wet on wet technique, which just means we have a wet surface and we are applying wet paint to it. I love wet on wet watercolor techniques. These are the techniques where you really get to see watercolor do its thing and basically watch as the paint kind of paints the surface on its own. I'm now picking up the panel here and just tilting it a little bit so that the paint can kind of move a little bit more easily to those areas where there's water but no color yet. And if I get any paint on the tree trunk, I just grab a towel and kind of daub it over to pick up the paint. It does stain the trunk a little bit or stain the paper a little bit, but that's okay. It'll be covered with brown when I paint it later. I'm now going back in with some more yellow just because, like I mentioned before, yellow is my lightest color and it did kind of get lost with all the red and orange, so I'm just going back in with some more yellow and adding it in. I'll even add a little bit of orange and red too, just to kind of beef those colors up a little bit more. but that I'm practically done with this panel here. You can see here how that tilting it and the spray, the irregular spray of the water from the spray bottle really does kind of mimic the look of leaves in a tree, and I think this is a really great, easy technique for kind of coloring or creating the leaves on this tree. And I'm sure you noticed I did dab my towel over my sentiment. That was just to pick up some of the paint so the sentiment was still very visible because the paint's a little bit opaque. I now will set that aside to dry, and I'll move on to watercoloring the boys. I'm going to use the same watercolors to paint these boys. And again, this is the panel where I sketched out the remainder of the hand and foot. And I'm going to start by just mixing some water with the paint. I do will take these colors and kind of mix 2 colors or 3 colors together to kind of get the right hues that I want. I'm going to play some music here and let you guys follow along as I paint, and I'll meet you back when I'm just about done. Okay, so I'm back. I'm just about done here. Going to finish up by adding a little bit of shadow to the skin of the boys. I do that just by mixing in a little bit of like brown to the tan color that I created, and that will complete the watercoloring on these guys. I'll hold it up to the camera so you can see. I'll set that aside to dry, and now I'm ready to move on to the tree trunk on this first panel. And again, you don't have to worry about that staining on the trunk from earlier when we were painting the leaves. That will easily be covered up by the brown that we're going to use. So I'm using the brown straight out of the pan here, just kind of picking it up and putting it into the palette, mixing it with some water. And then I grab a little bit of black and add that to the brown as well. I'm just going to darken it up and make it a little different than the brown that was straight in the pan. And once I got the color the way I like it, I go straight to paper with my paint. One nice thing about this is you do not have to worry about getting this brown on the boys, so you don't have to paint very carefully. You can see I'm still going around the boys here because that's my default setting, is to color within the lines, but I will eventually remember and I will start painting over. Like you can see I painted right over his arm and his boot a little bit here. So I'm just painting a flat color of this brown first, so getting all the trunk and the branches. I even go out into where the red is a little bit with the brown just to kind of extend the branch. And once I get it all painted, I will go in and add a little bit of black to the brown and then add a shadow on the right side of the tree, and this just creates the illusion of roundness, and I'll do that even to the underside of the branches as well. And you can see how well the brown paint covered up the stain from when we painted the leaves. You wouldn't even known that we had it there. So I'm finished with this panel and now ready for the next step. I'm now going to re-stamp my sentiment. I didn't move it out of my MISTI, so it's in the exact same spot I stamped it before, so everything should line up perfectly. Even though I dabbed up the paint over the sentiment, some of this paint is still there, and it's just kind of obscuring the sentiment and making it a little bit difficult to read. So I'm just going to stamp it one more time. So I just inked up a VersaFine and stamped it again, and as you can see, now the sentiment is nice and bold and crisp and very vivid. So that was a very easy fix. I'm now going to fussy cut out the second set of boys that I painted. To make it easier, I'm just going to cut off the excess watercolor paper, and now I'm starting to cut right along the line of the stamped image. I went ahead and cut a lot of that out because it's very simple fussy cutting, but I am going to show you guys how I cut out that interior section between his arm and his back. So his hand and his foot are actually touching, but I just cut right between them. When I adhere this to my card front, you won't even notice that I did actually run the blade of the scissors between the hand and the foot. And then I just cut out that interior section. Now that my boys are cut out, I'm now going to trim down my watercolor panel to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so an A2 panel size, and then I'll be ready to assemble my card. So I have my panel now trimmed, so it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm going to adhere this panel down onto an A2 top folding card base. I'm going to use some Tombow Mono multi-liquid adhesive. This is a liquid glue, obviously. I really like to use liquid glues to adhere my panels down. It works great for watercolor paper, and it gives me a little bit of wiggle room so I can make sure that panel is perfectly straight on my card base. I'm holding it down for a second here, and now I'm ready to add the boys. So I already went ahead off camera and added some foam tape to the back side of these boys, and now I'm just going to remove the backing, flip them over here, and then line them up directly with the stamped boys on the panel. And that will complete my card. I'll hold it to the camera here so you can get a better look at that background and the watercoloring that I did on the boys and the trunk. I really love the wet on wet watercolor technique with the spray bottle. It's very easy to do, and it really gives this loose look that really does mimic the look of leaves on a tree. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you want any more information on the products I use, please visit waffleflower.com, and you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for more creative ideas. Thanks for watching.